no secret that the trucking industry has been under some great strains in recent years as we walk deeper and deeper into the freight recession. And it's evident that people in the industry are feeling it based on the newest report from the American Transportation Research Institute. Each year, they identify the industry's top concerns, and we're going to dive into just what they identified right now with Rebecca Brewster. Rebecca is the President and Chief Operating Officer for ATRI, and she joins us on the line now from somewhere in the world. Rebecca, how are you and where are you?
I am doing wonderful, and I'm in my home in Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta, Georgia. What's the weather like there today?
It's surprisingly cool. I wasn't expecting that to come back to cool temperatures. So cool is all relative, but it's,
Yeah.
It's in the mid-50s here. So
all right, that's nice. Some nice fall weather there in Georgia. I like that. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, and I know we got a lot to talk about here with this top concern study. You do, and we've talked numerous times before. You obviously do a lot of research and a lot of reports and studies there at ATRI. Where does this one rank with regards to what can be learned? Because for me, I take quite a bit away from it. Where does this one rank for you?
I believe this is probably my top favorite thing we do at ATRI because it is so illuminating on what's happening in the industry. And really, Scott, this is sort of the driving force behind determining what research will be selected by ATRI's Research Advisory Committee. They rely on this report to really give direction on, what are the critical topics, where can research bring more direction for the industry in each of these topics.
Yeah. And the idea obviously is to get a sense of where people's heads are at and what they're dealing with out there, which tells us quite a bit, right? Because the feelings that people have are, they don't come out of the blue, obviously. They're a result of what they're dealing with out there.
Absolutely. And, originally when this survey started in 2005, it was really designed to help the industry look down the road. What are the issues that are coming down the road that we need to prepare for? But quite frankly, it's more reflective of, and I think there's real value in this, what are the pain points we're experiencing right now? And so, I think about the first one, in 2005, fuel costs were near the top because, if you recall, that's when we had Hurricane Katrina. The Gulf fuel supply was greatly impacted, so prices went way up. So it really is, and has been since it started, reflective of what's happening in the industry that's impacting motor carriers, it's impacting drivers, and even other industry stakeholders. That's what's so compelling about it, is it represents the opinions, the collective opinions of everybody who has a nexus to trucking.
And certainly we're going to look at the list here in just a second because they do tell us a lot about what you're talking about here. But the one thing that I wonder is the freight recession obviously has been looming large over the entire industry over the past few years. How much do you think the freight recession factored into the results we see today? Because as you pointed out, things that are going on 2005, fuel prices was a big concern. I imagine right now the freight recession is factoring into all this.
It is, and I always say it's very hard to separate any one of these issues from another. They're all interconnected in a certain way. You can't really disconnect the economy and driver compensation because one is definitely impacting the other. And so, it looms large. I would like to say, next year's survey, we don't have the top concern be the state of the nation's economy. It would be nice if we had something else take over. So, yeah. But it has been lingering, and it really does color how people select their top concerns.
Yeah. And when we look at those top concerns, it is important to note, again, that you separate them based on what is concerning for carriers and what's concerning for drivers. There's two separate lists there, and you kind of, at the end, put them all together into one. Let's start with the drivers here and focus on them for a little bit here. And if you wouldn't mind, just kind of run us through the top 10 or top 5, maybe some of the highlights here if you could, and then we can drill down into some of the details for some of those.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to note that in this year's top 10, we had 4 new issues that we had not seen in the overall top 10 before. So that was I can't use the adjective exciting, but it was really interesting that we had 4 new issues break into the top 10, but several of those had been on the driver list for a couple of years. So let's start with number 1 for drivers, driver compensation. And no surprise there, if the economy is the overall issue, clearly it's impacting drivers in their wallet. And so driver compensation, number 1, lack of available truck parking, number 2. And Scott, if you look back over the past 4 or 5 years, those 2 issues basically go swap places back and forth depending on the year for drivers' top concerns. Number 3, one of these new issues that showed up for the first time, English language proficiency for drivers.
I've heard something about
that.
Number
3. Yeah, there's been a little something in the news about that recently.
Yeah.
Number 4, broker issues. That's another issue that had been on the driver list before that we had seen. And then number 5, held on to its number 5 spot among drivers, and that's detention and delay at customer facilities.
Interesting. And driver compensation and truck parking, they kind of, are flipping. Is it disappointing to you, or maybe that's not even the right word, maybe interesting is the right word again too, but the fact that those 2 keep coming in 1 and 2 year after year is a bit discouraging when I look at it, because you would think that if those concerns are known, and they are certainly known, I think, throughout the industry, where's the action on both of those issues? Because we're not seeing it obviously to the point where people are satisfied with where things are going.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. It's interesting though on truck parking. If your listeners download the full report, which they can do at no cost from ATRI's website, I made a note in the full report that truck parking is actually one of those issues where in 2025 we had some good news. We're seeing states announce, most recently Ohio and Pennsylvania, investment in expanding truck parking capacity. And, I hadn't thought of this till a driver pointed it out to me. She said, courtesy of the state of the economy and the freight recession, she said truck parking is a little bit easier to find these days because there aren't as many trucks on the road. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, and I know truck parking is a big issue for you, and we've talked about this before, in other conversations. But, it does feel like we are making some progress there. You mentioned Ohio and Pennsylvania. We've talked about those states and talked with people in those states on their truck parking initiatives. Florida, I know, is making some strides as well. So you feel good about us making some progress at least. Obviously, we're not where we want to be, but it does feel like we're getting somewhere.
It does. And, again, if we could just get that dedicated federal fund source so that state DOTs don't have to figure out, am I going to apply for truck parking grants or am I going to use that money for roads and bridges? Because in the trucking industry, we want all of that. We want truck parking and we want well-maintained and added capacity on the roadways. So.
Yeah. Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, fightingfortruckers.com is a place to reach out to your lawmakers to get them on board with that. Let's go back to the list here, Rebecca. You mentioned, and I think this is interesting, there are 4 new topics, concerns on the top 10 list here. You mentioned one of them at least there, the English language proficiency. I think that goes without saying because it's been in the headlines so much here. What are the other 3? And there's one that stands out to me, and I'd like to ask you about it. But the other 3 that are new to the list, can you kind of run us through those?
Absolutely. They're new to the overall list is artificial intelligence in trucking, which on the overall list came in at number 10, but among drivers, it's number 6. Then driver training standards broke through to the top 10. That's one of those issues that drivers had on their list for several years now, I think since 2019, but enough other respondents to the survey voted for driver training standards that it broke through to the top 10, but it's number 7 among drivers. And then the other new issue is diesel emissions regulations. So overall, it's number 8. Among drivers, it's number 10. And the interesting thing is, on the past 2 years' surveys, we've had battery electric vehicles in the overall top 10. That issue went from number 6 in last year's survey to number 23 in this year's survey because we know of what the Trump administration has done. Right. So there's been a lot of positive movement in this space, in this environmental space. But the one looming issue out there is the fact that we've still got a low NOx rule that says, come model year 27 trucks, you have to meet certain standards that are going to greatly drive up the price of equipment. And when you contrast that with the freight recession and what's happening in the economy, it really is a big concern for the industry.
Yeah, it's not pretty. The one that stood out to me, and again, I think some of the things on the list here make sense. You mentioned driver training standards. There's been more attention on that, I think, in a positive way. English language proficiency, obviously, artificial intelligence in trucking. That's the one that continues to equal parts fascinate and terrify me. I think it has a lot of good applications that we could see, but there's obviously the downside there too. What were drivers kind of saying when it came to artificial intelligence with regard to their concerns?
So I think that really is a two-sided issue for everybody, because the potential gains we could get from artificial intelligence in terms of productivity and safety and understanding, a whole host of things are really potentially very exciting.
Yeah.
But there's no question, everybody, I don't care what job you're in, wonders, is my job going to be eliminated because of AI? I mean, maybe we don't need trucking researchers in the future, So I mean,
let's hope that's not the case. But yeah, that's
I hope that's not the case. But I mean,
yeah.
it has the potential to, greatly impact a lot of workspaces, and so I think that's why it shows up on the driver's list. And look, one of the other big topics ATRI just recently released a study on was cargo theft, and there's no question that growth in AI, unfortunately, facilitates the bad guys' ability to steal our cargo.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting, and I imagine this is going to, rise up the list, at least for truck drivers here in the years to come, as this stuff gets more integrated into people's everyday lives. Let's look at and I want to follow this up with kind of contrasting them, but if you could just run us real quick through the motor carrier top concern list, and then I want to ask you about some of the differences that we see between the two. But the motor carrier concerns are what?
So the motor carrier top 10 is the economy, lawsuit abuse reform, its close cousin, as I say, insurance cost and availability at number 3, CSA at number 4. As I described that one, the gift that just keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Driver shortage, driver retention, driver distraction. So 3 driver issues there. Diesel emissions regulations, truck parking, and broker issues.
Okay, so let me ask you what you make of what I see, and if you have a different perspective, please share it with us. But I see a disconnect here between what carriers are concerned about and what drivers are concerned about. There's very little overlap here if you look at the list. In fact, I think just 2 issues that drivers are most concerned about appear on the carrier list, those being truck parking and broker issues. Again, I view it as a disconnect. Do you kind of view it in the same way, or how do you kind of interpret what you see there?
Sure. And I think some are logically would not appear one on one list and the other list.
Sure,
For
right.
instance, lawsuit abuse reform and insurance cost and availability. Unless you're an owner-operator, you're not paying the insurance bill. And unless you're involved in a crash, you're not being dragged into the courtroom. So, but those are 2 very impactful issues for motor carriers. My panelist recently, when we released the results of this, the motor carrier said he is continually frustrated that truck parking doesn't rank higher on the motor carrier list of concerns. He said, and he even proposed that what we should do is take away the motor carrier executives parking at their facility and tell them they have to find a place out somewhere on the street to park, to really drive home how critical this issue is for drivers. So, how passionate I am about that issue, and I include it in every conversation and presentation I do around the country. I am really hopeful that we see that one. Either we fix the issue, but if it remains on the driver list, I really want to see it get higher up on the motor carrier list.
Yeah, and that's a message you hammer home, I would imagine, knowing you and knowing this issue.
I do.
Yeah. What reaction do you get from people when you bring it up?
I see people, they understand, and I talk about how the lack of available truck parking impacts, if carriers are concerned about finding and keeping the best drivers, then they need to appreciate and understand those issues that are standing in the way of that. And one of them is truck parking. There's no question. We know from our research on why we aren't attracting more women to over-the-road driving positions. It's concern about their safety because there's not enough safe parking. These are just everyday issues that impact drivers and impact our ability as an industry to keep people in driving jobs.
Yeah. To your point there, I in this list, I think every year that it comes out, I think it's illuminating and interesting, and it informs decisions, and it's got a lot of uses. I do see it in a lot of ways as kind of what you mentioned there. It's a powerful message to carriers. Again, I understand their interests take on a different angle because, of course, they're operating from a different place and they've got different interests in mind. I get that. But again, the list here, the lists, I suppose, between the two of them don't really line up very much with, the men and women who make their living behind the wheel of a commercial vehicle. Um, what I guess what is something that you think could be learned from that? And I think you have taken that message to carriers before that, hey, if you want to retain drivers, right, you've got to listen to them and make sure their concerns are being addressed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's interesting when I think about driver compensation, number one for drivers doesn't show up on the motor carrier list, but yet I point out in the full report, 8.1% of the motor carriers who took this survey selected driver compensation as one of their top concerns. And, you think that's because, well, they don't want to pay more. But the fact of the matter is, in talking anecdotally to some carriers, it's really concern over they want to be able to continue to pay their drivers. And, you can't walk back anybody's pay. So in light of the freight recession, they're having to make decisions, back office cuts, holding off purchasing new equipment, a lot of tough decisions at that motor carrier executive level because they don't want to negatively impact driver compensation.
Yeah, perspective is important because again, everybody's operating from their own place and they've got their own interests, and it does help to, I think about what the other side is going through. And in terms of these motor carriers, they're dealing with a freight recession that's been going on for, it feels like 3 decades. It's been about 3 years now.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they're facing problems as well. One thing again, and I'll compliment you all again, is that this report doesn't just kind of point to concerns. It does provide potential strategies for dealing with the concerns. Overall, again, this paints a picture, I think, of an industry under some pretty big strains. What are some of and this is maybe a tough question to answer, but some of the more easily solvable problems as you look at the list? Because we have a lot of problems that we're looking at here. What are some that you feel were a little bit closer than maybe on some others?
Yeah. So I tongue in cheek said CSA is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
And the fact that, it's been on the top 10 list overall since 2010. We know that FMCSA has proposed fixes again to CSA that were developed and refined with industry input. If we could just get those implemented, I believe we could see CSA drop out of the top 10. And personally, from my perspective, because this is the one report I still write myself, I would just be happy to have something else to write about in CSA. Yeah. So, that's certainly one of them. The renewed attention or current attention on English language proficiency for drivers, I think that may be, just a reflection of when we launched the survey, like fuel costs were back in 2005. I think the attention that's being put on that now will likely not, that will move down the list. Hopefully, if it continues to get the attention and enforcement that is needed there, hopefully that one is not with us for a long time. Who knows? If we had launched the survey a little later, it might have been non-domiciled
I was
CDLs
going to say, yeah.
was the issue. So, some of these are not necessarily easy fixes, but the amount of attention on them may fix them and get all that attention will generate action that takes care of those issues.
You've been doing these reports for a while, and I would imagine there isn't a whole lot that surprises you anymore, but did anything surprise you when you were getting responses back on this one?
Well, it's funny because, and I pointed this out in the report too, we were going to add English language proficiency to the survey anyway before all this happened because so many drivers have been writing it in as an issue for the past several years. And as a reminder to your listeners, you can write in a concern. You don't have to pick from just the list there. If something else is your big issue, write it in. So we were going to add ELP to the survey because of all the write-ins. And then, of course, we got the executive order in April and the crashes, high-profile crashes with that topic. So, I wasn't surprised to see that one. But honestly, the one that really surprised me was AI in trucking.
Really?
It was recommended we add it to the list. I thought, that's silly. Nobody's going to pick that. And boy, was I wrong.
But it tells you that it's on people's minds and they're worried about it, or at least thinking about it.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah. And there's, again, as I said earlier, I think equal parts fascinated and terrified of what it could mean. And I think that's mostly based on my personality, though. But clearly a concern out there. Participation was up this year. That's encouraging, I think. Any idea as to why that might be?
Because I think these issues are so topical right now. I just think there's so much attention on all these issues. And I also think it's just people are just tired of what's happening in the economy, and they just are getting frustrated,
Yeah, I share that frustration. Non-domiciled CDLs. I was going to ask you this too, with ELP being on there. Did anybody by chance write in non-domiciled CDLs? Because that wasn't. Yes. They did. Okay.
Yes,
you saw that quite a bit.
We had write-ins for that too, and so what we do with the write-ins is we evaluate for the next year's survey. Is that an issue we want to add on the bulleted list of issues you can choose from? So we mine those write-ins pretty extensively, both for issues and strategies as well.
Yeah. Any idea, and I know it's too early to look to next year because we're still dealing with today, but any ideas based on tea leaves, based on responses, based on what's going on right now, whatever it may be, what next year's list might look like? Any issues you think maybe are going to fall off or appear or rise up the ranks? Do you have a sense of that at all?
Well, because some of these are just harder to tackle, even with good recommendations on the strategies, they're harder to tackle. And I think one of those is lawsuit abuse reform.
Yeah.
We've got to chip away at it at the state level where we have had some good wins. But we also likely need, we've got some new federal legislation introduced that would make stage accidents a federal crime. There are pieces that can be accomplished at the federal level as well as at the state level, but that's a tough one. So I think it's going to continue to stay near the top, and where it stays, insurance cost and availability will stay as well.
One thing that strikes me when I look at the list here, look at all the lists, because you got them broken down, again, between truck drivers and motor carriers and overall and owner-operators, the list goes on and on. The thing that strikes me as you look at it is these are, in a lot of cases, especially for truck drivers, things that are really out of their control, right? And I think that probably fuels that frustration in a lot of cases because they can't do anything about it. With the motor carrier list, there are clearly things that they can't control in a lot of cases, the economy being the number one, and it's at the top of the list there. But I do feel, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I do feel like they have more control over some of these issues. What I guess, and I'm going to circle back to my question earlier, what's a lesson you hope that people take away from the report overall?
Well, because I've said it now for so many years, I really want to hammer home to motor carriers that, if in your top 10 is finding and keeping the best drivers, then you've got to focus on what's on the left side of that equation. Because I'm looking at the table and the truck drivers are on the left side. And when I put up a slide in my PowerPoints, they're always on the left side. They've got to focus on what drivers say are most concerning to them. And we've got to get some more similar rankings of these issues between the two groups. They're never going to be the same, but we've got to really get some focus on what drivers say is most concerning to them. Because can drivers go to do drivers have the time to go lobby their DOT and their state house to get truck parking
Nope.
capacity added? No, but motor carriers can do that.
Yeah,
right. Motor carriers can do that. So, we've just got to get some greater connections between those lists.
And are they perceptive to that message? Open to it?
I think so, because, nobody wants to tell Rebecca Brewster no.
Yeah, I can believe that. Well, we're not going to tell you no. And anytime you want to come on the show, the answer will be yes. But again,
thank you.
As I said earlier, this list, I think, is, informative and helpful in so many ways. Thank you for putting it together. Thank you for everybody there at ATRI that contributes to putting it together. We appreciate your time, and I'm sure we will talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on today.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of Trucking with OOIDA was brought to you by a dedicated team of people. That includes Jim Fetzer, Tennille Flick, and Kim Boren.
You can listen to new episodes and extended interviews on your favorite podcast platform and on the OOIDA YouTube page. Please subscribe while you're there. If you've got thoughts, we'd love to hear them. Call us at 1-800-324-6856 and leave a message, or send us an email to podcast@ooida.com, and we might include it on the show.